What is the craziest freakout you've ever seen in public? Story 1. I was picking up a pizza and I always open the box to make sure it looks correct. I opened one box and it was 90% burnt. I told the girl, "This is burnt. Could you please make another?" She picked up the pizza and threw it at the wall. She huffed off and made another. She then later started texting me, apologizing that it was the worst day of her life and she was the only one working. Story 2. I was at Chipotle, and some woman had a meltdown trying to order multiple orders for her family and started screaming at the cashier. She was like, "Why are you laughing at me? What is the matter with you?" The cashier was some poor teenage girl who was definitely not laughing at her, and she handled it like a pro. The woman then proceeded to pay and sit down and eat with her husband and kids as if nothing had happened. Story 3. Worked at a big-name grocery store during Thanksgiving one year. The store had one of those meal deals where they sell you a bundle of Thanksgiving essentials for about $75 or whatever. We had a known troublemaker. The company's human resources has her on a blacklist for complaints and would call and laugh with the store manager after she would file one, who would always try her luck on deals, discounts, or coupons. The limit to this meal deal was about 2 per household. She proceeds to try and buy about 6 or 7 bundles. The manager says she will only get 2, and the rest sold at the retail price. Some back and forth arguing begins, and she does not get her way. She then begins to smash gallons of milk she had in her cart on the ground, opens up a carton of eggs and begins throwing them not only at the manager but innocent bystanders as well. Story 4. This baseball mom in American Eagle was chewing out my wife at the top of her lungs because the baseball mom's mouth got her son kicked out of baseball permanently. Meanwhile, after a 20-minute tirade, security escorted her out of the mall. The lady behind the counter looks at us and asks what that was all about. We exchange looks and answer, "Not a clue. Never seen her before." Story 5. In line at Five Guys about 8 years ago, a tiny Asian woman had a major outburst because Five Guys does not serve fresh brewed hot tea. She proceeds to grab 4 or 5 jumbo cups and runs to the fountain drinks machine, begins furiously filling them before trying to run out of the restaurant. She dumps her armful of sodas in the parking lot and soaks herself in the process, then just stands there, screaming in frustration for a moment. Story 6. Once when I worked overnight at Walgreens, a woman approached me at around 3 a.m. and started screaming, accusing me of making her feet bleed because, according to her, I was judging her with my negative vibes. Her feet were definitely not bleeding, which I could easily tell because she took her shoes off and put her feet on the counter. She then refused to pay for what she was buying because, according to her, the credit card reader emits radiation, and she did not want to get dosed with it. So instead, she just ran away into the night. Story 7. A boys' hockey game, where they were about 10 years old, was happening when one of the dads started screaming, "What are you doing?" at his son. He got so angry that he stormed out of the building. That poor kid had to ride home with his father, who was behaving irrationally, later. Story 8. I saw a 15-woman fight at a coffee shop in Beijing. It went from silence to screeching in 3 seconds. Glasses flying, punches thrown, hair pulled, food airborne. Just absolute Looney Tunes chaos. All that was missing was a fight cloud. The entire coffee shop stopped to look. Then, as fast as it started, it was like nothing happened. I kid you not. These ladies just sat back down, ordered more drinks, and acted like nothing happened. Meanwhile, the serving staff were cleaning up glass around them. They weren't even asked to leave. This was only slightly less crazy than a similar fight I saw at a college bar. Story 9. Maybe not the craziest, but the funniest. A group of college-aged people were out partying in Adams Morgan, a famous drinking neighborhood in Washington, D.C. A guy takes a step out of the group in a hurry, clearly trying to put some distance between himself and another member. A girl steps out behind him, and very sloppily drunk with tears streaming down her face, yells, "I can't believe you would say that to me during my birthday month." Story 10. I saw a man screaming and swearing at a pharmacist in a Walgreens. Apparently, he called and asked how much of an over-the-counter medicine they had, and the pharmacist said 2. Turns out that there were actually 3, and so he went off on the poor pharmacist for 15 minutes straight. He apparently needed all three, but only brought enough money for two because that person lied to me on the phone. It was to the point where I almost called the police on him. Story 11. Next to our ambulance station, there's a paved concrete trail that runs through the middle of our small city. It's meant for people jogging or just out for a walk. But of course, that's not always the case. So one morning, an officer calls us out for a possible homeless man having a good old freakout session on the trail. Only when we arrive, it's not the usual behavioral health emergency we deal with on a daily basis. The man, a Caucasian male that appears to be in his early 30s, is naked and on all fours. He's smashing his face repeatedly as hard as he can into the hard concrete. We can't even get a single response out of him. He just won't stop smashing his face into the ground. At this point, he must have been doing it for at least several minutes due to the amount of blood and with his face looking like raw hamburger meat molded over a broken skull. My medic partner decides the only thing we can do is to chemically sedate him via a needle to the outer thigh. In order to do this, me and the now two officers on the scene will have to hold him down using all four of his extremities and hope he can't use what's left of his head to harm us. This was all done successfully, and the medication, I can't recall exactly what was administered, was given. The patient was now a sleepy time bear and with us on the way to the emergency department. Later, blood draws and an interview with the patient would show that our guy had smoked enough meth to take down the Luftwaffe. Story 12. Denver Airport in February. Whole bunch of canceled flights in the evening, which made the United Airlines customer service line ridiculously long and backed up the phone and internet chats. I stood in line for 3 hours as the poor woman behind me finally got through on the phone line. She explained repeatedly that United Airlines had canceled her flight. She had rebooked it for the next day, but then they uncanceled her original flight and would not let her on because she was no longer listed on the original flight. She and her partner had 2 small special needs children and a lot of equipment, and staying in Denver overnight was not really an option. She explained it to the person enough I could have talked to the agent on her behalf verbatim, but the agent, it seemed, could not comprehend the issue. The line hardly moved all this time and her original flight was leaving soon. After about the 30th time she explained it, she finally lost her mind. There was a sudden roar behind me as this poor woman unleashed hours of frustration and rage. I could no longer understand what she was saying as she stormed past me, louder than the plane she was trying to fly out on. The entire customer line parted like she was Moses at the Red Sea as she roared up the line, still shouting, red-faced, and hair askew into the phone. She rounded the corner to the customer service desk as people scattered. I am assuming they helped her because I did not see her the rest of the night. I felt she was absolutely justified, and the rest of us in line around her agreed. Story 13. As a young man, I found myself in a tough financial spot. I had to purchase a vehicle or face homelessness, as my car was my job and it had been smashed into. The car loan was $420 a month for a Hyundai Elantra, decently equipped. At the last minute, they tried to raise it to $480. I faked a heart attack. I didn't dramatically grab my chest and raise an arm. I really faked a heart attack. I just got quiet, looked down, walked back and forth for a second, knelt down and asked for an ambulance, started shaking and allowed the salesman to assist me to the couch. By this time, the whole showroom had circled around me as I just repeated the car price in a soft, weak tone. The ambulance came. They took my shirt off and performed an electrocardiogram on me right on the showroom floor. They said I was as healthy as a horse, just a bit dehydrated. I ate the salesman's lunch. The price went back down to $420. I still got taken advantage of, so forget them. Story 14. I once witnessed a guy ransack his entire car looking for what I presumed to be missing money or drugs. I was across the street, eating in my car when I heard this dude wailing, and I mean ultimate fear cries, from across a usually busy street. I think I was the only one who saw it, but I still remember the total despair of the scene. Could have been a missing doctor's note when I think about it now, but I hope he found it. Story 15. I worked in a movie theater in the early 2000s. I had a woman come into the lobby and demand a refund for a half-eaten bag of popcorn in a plain brown paper bag. When I told her no, she started stomping around my lobby, said my theater was a temple dedicated to Satan worship, tipped over a standee, and told me not to go anywhere because I was under arrest. Then she left. Story 16. Dude I work with legitimately believes everyone wants him fired when really we just want him to do his job. He's screamed at me multiple times in the office and has said that my manager and I are conspiring to get him fired. It all came to a head when things got heated in a meeting between the three of us. He was sent to human resources. I found out later that he ran away from the human resources guy and into the vice president's office, bursting through the door and diving onto the floor. Then, Army crawling under the desk, saying, "You got to help me. They're after me. They want me gone." It took the vice president an hour to coax him out from under the desk, and then he got sent home for the rest of the week to cool off. That was 5 months ago, and he still works with me. Story 17. I was working at a T-Mobile storefront in a mall in 2008 when a lady came in having an absolute temper tantrum about her bill. She refused to pay it and was upset that her service had been cut off. Within maybe 3 minutes of her outburst, someone had called mall security and they arrived on 2 Segway scooters. They hit her with a taser, she wet her pants, and they literally dragged her out of the mall by her arms. I think about that moment in my life pretty frequently. Story 18. I worked overnight in room dining at a hotel once, years and years ago. It was a fancy hotel and resort around Christmas time. I showed up at a room with some food, and the man answered it wearing a full-on sexy Santa outfit, with fishnet leggings and a big beer belly. I cautiously put their food down on the table, and they proceeded to cry hysterically and tipped me $100. Not so much of a public freak out, but a freak out nevertheless. Story 19. I lived in a really terrible apartment complex. There were many couples having arguments, screaming, and yelling at all hours. The police were called frequently. The worst incident was when a man started throwing canned goods off his balcony at the cars below. He smashed tons of windshields and dented hoods. The most severe was the can of clam chowder that broke through a window and exploded all over the interior of a car. That poor person couldn't get the smell out. Story 20. A man at the State and Lake Red Line station was simply minding his own business while waiting for a train. Another individual approached him and forcefully knocked a small styrofoam takeout box out of the first man's hands, scattering what appeared to be a Reuben sandwich all over the floor. The initial individual had a look of shocked betrayal on his face. It was clear he did not know the other person at all. His expression reminded me of a popular meme featuring a kangaroo that had its food taken away from it. Just moments earlier, he had been about to enjoy a sandwich. Someone confronted the person who had slapped the food away, questioning, "What in the world, man?" To which the aggressive individual responded, "Do you want to die today?" It was the most absurd and unexpected act of aggression I have ever witnessed. Story 21. While I was a server, 22 years old at the time, at a nice restaurant, I was assigned a table of 4, consisting of 2 couples in their mid-40s. One of the wives was clearly inebriated, and the bartender informed me she had a 1-drink limit during her stay. When she tried to order a second drink and I had to tell her no, she began loudly berating me. The husband attempted to quiet her and get her to calm down, but she was standing up and pointing her finger in my face. This was my 4th year of serving experience, so I just stood there with a very passive expression. My manager came up beside me, placed his hands on my shoulders, gently moved me aside, and stood in my place. The lady didn't even acknowledge the change and just kept venting. They were asked to leave and eventually did. The hostess came up afterward and said, "Oh man, that was my English teacher." Story 22. We used to have this elderly lady who would come into our big box retail store and complain that some of our cashiers wearing shirts with rainbows were violating her personal rights. Then one day she started calling our managers the N-word and yelling at customers outside the same. She finally was kicked off the property, but not before running off with a cart full of stuff. The most satisfying thing was our shopping carts have an automatic locking wheel when you go to the edge of the property, and watching her yell obscenities all the way with stolen merchandise only to get to the boundary and the cart to lock up was justice in real life. She threw an even bigger fit, and I had the biggest smile. Story 23. I just watched 2 security guards escort a person out of a mall and then argued with him in the parking lot because he was inhaling directly from an aerosol can. In front of them, he was asserting, "It's fine. Like I won't die. Okay? I'm fine. And then they started fighting as my Uber pulled away. Story 24. When the producer of a small movie I was working on argued with the head makeup artist that her month-late first invoice for kit rental was well over her deal memo, and he wasn't going to pay the excess, she physically launched herself onto his back from the top step of the makeup trailer, clung like a monkey, and started clawing at his face while screaming, "You're stealing! You're stealing!" I was just 20 feet away, but was literally too shocked to move. Not only was this at 9 a.m. in the middle of a busy downtown street, and in full view of many passersby, one of the assistant directors just happened to be escorting the show's A-list star to set exactly then, so he got an eyeful of her enraged chimpanzee act, too. Our standby traffic cop quickly pried her off, handcuffed her, ushered her off site, and placed her in the back of his cruiser, where she continued to scream hysterically. After a brief consultation with the producer about charges, she was taken away in another squad car, booked for assault, cautioned not to return to the set, and released. I think she later got diversion into an anger management program. For some bizarre reason, after that incident, no production manager would hire her. Go figure. She was also ostracized so thoroughly by her fellow department heads, nobody would even give her a day call to do extras makeup. In fact, her career went downhill so severely, she wasn't even able to land a part-time job teaching at the local film school or community college, which is the designated destination for so many of our locals' unemployables eventually wash up. She started to drink and then left the business entirely within a year. The last time I ran across her, she was working at a third-tier department store's makeup/perfume counter. She pretended she didn't see me, ruined her career, which was quite promising, for the sake of scamming a show out of a couple of $100 extra.